Hello and welcome to this video. And it's lovely to see you here. I hope you're all well. On this video I'm going to be going through the 10 greatest hair metal albums of all time. Now this was motivated by a comment that came on my channel where somebody on the Eddie Van Halen video had said, I don't think Van Halen that important. If all you're saying is they influence hair metal, that's not much, is it? And I thought, hang on. Hair metal, that's not much. Now I know the 1980s was a dark period for music in many ways, and hair metal was responsible for a lot of really dodgy rock music. You know, we were all there, too cool for hair metal, weren't we? We were all too cool for it. There we were listening to our Anthrax and Slayer albums, waiting for grunge to come along, weren't we? No, we weren't. We were buying the albums, and I was buying the albums too. And it got me to think about this. I thought that hair metal, 1980s hair metal, is a little bit like 1970s progressive rock, isn't it? It's just not cool. And yet musically there's tons of interesting stuff going on, and some incredible musicians, and some incredible musicianship, and some wonderful music was made. So I've gone away and I've come up with what I think is the 10 greatest hair metal albums of the 1980s, okay? So hair metal sort of grew out of a whole different ruck, that's the what I'm going to use, a whole different ruck of bands. There's a little bit of Aerosmith in there, there's a little bit of Van Halen, a little bit of AC/DC, a little bit of Barry Manilow, a little bit of Kiss, you know, a little bit of, the Beach Boys. You throw all that together and you get hair metal. It's fun, it's rocking, it can be gutsy, it's about entertainment, right? But there's a lot of musical worth to these albums. And throughout the 1980s, me being a musician, I was buying these albums because underneath that, you had these incredible guitar players like Steve Vai and Paul Gilbert and Vinnie Moore and George Lynch, you know, a whole host of guitarists that were also making instrumental guitar music, which was moving towards progressive rock and moving towards jazz fusion as well. It's a very interesting time. And so I've got my list here, and as I've started this video I realised because I've got these glasses on I cannot see my list. So what have we got? Sorry about this. Let's have a look. Right, so at number, at number 10 I have Disturbing the Peace. I have Disturbing the Peace by Alcatraz, which came out in February 1985. Now, of course, Alcatraz was a band formed by Graham Bonnet. Graham Bonnet had been the lead singer on one Rainbow album called Down to Earth, which came out in 1979. And in a way, you could see it's a precursor to the sort of glammy hair metal we see in the 1980s. Before that, Rainbow had been a very sort of groundbreaking heavy rock band, bringing in sort of neoclassical influences. But then suddenly, on that album, Ritchie Blackmore went all commercial. And there we had a lead singer that didn't have long hair, right, up front with his little white jacket on, but one of the most incredible voices in rock. Obviously, Graham Bonnet had come out of a sort of background of soul and R&B. That's the type of singer he was. He suddenly plunged into the world with rock. And he decides to put a rock band together called Alcatraz, featuring a young Yngwie Malmsteen on the first album. Yngwie quickly gets his deal and he jumps ship to make, Rising Force or whatever it was, and become one of the great guitar gods of all time. And another guitarist that's just emerged on the scene out of Frank Zappa's band, that's going to crop up a couple of times on this, I think. Steve Vai is recruited in. Around about this time, I just discovered Steve Vai, got flexible, so I went out and purchased this album to see what it was like. And what we had was very MTV friendly, but with a tongue in its cheek, rock music. But Steve Vai doing all sorts of wonderful musical rock arrangements and composition, really incredible stuff. And what Vai does on this is a precursor to what he's going to do with the David Lee Roth band, what he's going to do with Whitesnake, and eventually what he's going to do on Passion and Warfare, which came out and sold 1 million records, which is an instrumental guitar album. But really would not have had the success if it wasn't for all this hair metal that was going. So that's what I've got at number 10, is Disturbing the Peace by Alcatraz. Great album, right? At number, sorry about this, I'll just take the glasses off and have a look. because I'm going to have to read it. Oh, I've got hair in my mouth. Oh my God, there you are. Right, anyway, at number 9, I have Dr. Feelgood by Mötley Crüe, which came out in August 1989. Now, Mötley Crüe, who sort of got together in the early 80s. Oh, should I put that? I can't. I was determined to keep these on, so I'll put these back on. So, Mötley Crüe, sorry about that, I'm putting my stuff down on the drum, so that's what the sound is. Mötley Crüe emerged in the early 80s with this hyper glam, you know, pulling from the Stooges, the New York Dolls, but also from, like, you know, British glam bands in the 70s. I wonder how much these bands like Sweet and, can I say Gary Glitter, and artists like that, how much David Bowie, that's all put into the mix, you know. And they emerge, and they're quite gutsy and rich. I really do like the first Mötley Crüe album. And then they sort of descend into this sort of trashy LA rock band. And there's some incredible things, you know, Girls, Girls, Girls comes out, huge hit. They're suffering with terrible drug problems throughout the 1980s. Now I think what happens, is Guns N' Roses come out, they bring out Appetite for Destruction. It's a huge album. And Mötley Crüe feel a little bit challenged by this, so they decide to get their act together. They sober themselves up and they go into the studio for the first time. So this is not the first time I'm going to say this on this video. And they're focused, because Mötley Crüe were a fantastic band. Tommy Lee's a wonderful rock drummer, you know, with a big, fat, heavy beat, incredible drum sound. Mick Mars is a very creative guitar player. Nicky Sixx, I don't know what he gets up to. And Vince Neil definitely has a memorable voice, doesn't he? So once they get the focus in, this album's an absolute masterpiece. It's without a doubt Mötley Crüe's best album. That opening track, Dr. Feelgood, with that riff, and the accompanying videos, they sort of zoom across the desert into some sort of tent thing. I remember seeing that and I thought, oh my God, I've got to get this album. Absolutely brilliant. And Kickstart My Heart there is just the sort of definitive hair metal track, you know. So I've got a few facts here about this album, so I have to put my glasses on again. Whoa, let's have a go. Yeah, so it came out in August 1989. It sold 6 million copies. This is the sort of thing we're talking about with these hair metal albums. 6 million copies. And a little known fact, I didn't know this until I did a little bit of reading up for this video, is that the backing vocalists on that album are Steven Tyler from Aerosmith, Bryan Adams, Robin Zander and Rick Nielsen from Cheap Trick. I haven't mentioned Cheap Trick on this channel, but I love Cheap Trick. And the Dream Police, what a rock track, a precursor to everything that's going here. And the members of Skid Row. Right, so that's what I got at number 9. God, there's a lot of glasses work here. Right, at number 8 I have Whitesnake 1987. Right, which came out in March 1987. I'm not putting the sunglasses on. I'm staying like as much. I like to be able to see you. You see, I mean, you've had the laugh with the sunglasses now. So what I'll do is I'll put them over here, like so you can still see them. You know, next underneath Mr. Roth there. You see them in the background. Lovely. Right. So yeah, this came out in March 1987, and this sold an incredible 11 million albums. Right. Whitesnake is obviously the solo project of David Coverdale, who had joined Deep Purple in 1974, replacing Ian Gillan. When that's folded, he formed this sort of rhythm and blues band called Whitesnake, who are one of my favourite bands, one of the sort of bands that got me into music back in 79, 1980, when I was listening to Ready and Willing and Come and Get It. Some of my favourite albums. The live album by Whitesnake, Live in the Heart of the City, is a very, very important album to me in terms of influence. Incredible band, Ian Pace, John Lord, the incredible Neil Moore on bass, you know, absolutely brilliant band, right? After they made, I think, Slip of the Tongue, and I think by that point Cozy Powell had been in the band, and then Cozy Powell decided to leave. David Coverdale thought that the band had it, he was ready to call it a day. Now, at that time on guitar he had John Sykes. Now, John Sykes is another guitarist very influential on me. I first heard him in the band Tigers of Pantang in the early 80s. He was one of the first guitarists I heard that was really alternate picking at speed, you know, and I think that got him noticed in the early 1980s with Tigers, which then got him the gig with Thin Lizzy, absolutely incredible. And then he jumps in with Whitesnake. Now, David Coverdale wanted to you know, jack the band in, but the record company, I think, which is Geffen Records, could see potential of a real solid collaboration between John Sykes and Whitesnake, and there was a decide to move to a much more American sound. Now this band right here, this Whitesnake here, eschew their old sound here. But what's interesting is there's a number of cover versions from the old band, most notably Here I Go Again. So they've got the songs, but they're Americanizing them, and there's a very strong influence on this album from, if you imagine taking Foreigner and Led Zeppelin and putting them together, that's what this sounds like. Now, David Coverdale then went on to, you know, do a collaboration with Jimmy Page, and when I played with Robert Plant back in the early 2000s, I can remember Robert Plant referring to David Coverdale as David Cover Version, and which I think is a comment on the influence that David Coverdale takes from Led Zeppelin. So they come out with Here I Go Again. It goes to #1 in the charts. That song was originally written for the Saints and Sinners album, and it was written by Bernie Marsden, a guy that I've met twice, and both times I met him, he sadly died last year, but both times I met him he seemed a very happy man, and I'm sure he has been able to pay his mortgage off and buy a few takeaways with the money he made from that record. 11 million sales and a #1 single. Now, when I was looking at the credits, I saw that on backing vocals, they'd got Tommy Funderburk. Tommy Funderburk, that is a real name. Tommy, not Thunder, Funder as in fun. Funderburk as in Burke. Right? Now, if you want to know what Burke is a British slang derogatory term for someone. Oh, he's a Burke. And if you want to know where that comes from, it comes from the Berkshire Hunt, which is Cockney rhyming slang. We'll leave it there. So we got Tommy Funderburk. This is like the most rock name I've ever heard. I thought, who's this guy? I looked up, he's actually a gospel singer. And he was in Airplay, the band Airplay, which also featured Jay Graydon, the great guitarist, session guitarist with Steely Dan. If we look at the lineup on this album, and this is the great thing about hair metal, here we have Whitesnake 11 min albums. Who's on it? We've got Neil Murray and Don Airey, who were originally in the band Colosseum, fusion band from the 1970s. We've got Ainsley Dunbar on drums, originally the drummer with Frank Zappa, right? And we've got a singer here from a band that featured Jay Graydon. These are jazz guys, these fusion guys, these are incredible musicians. I've met Neil Murray once, and he told me about the sort of evolution of this album, you know, and it's what a travel. If Neil Murray's watching this, I'd love to have him on the channel. What a travel to go from playing with Colosseum, you know, playing in bands like Bruford alongside Alan Holdsworth, and ending up playing on the 11 million album selling Whitesnake. So what are we on? 30 minutes. I'm going to go down to. I'm going to have to get a bit of a move on, aren't I? So that was number 8. At number 7, I have Permanent Vacation by Aerosmith, which is their best album. I know nobody wants to agree with this, but I love this album, Permanent Vacation, which came out in August 1977. Right. So Aerosmith emerged in the early 70s. They made some classic albums. I'm thinking Toys in the Attic, Get Your Wings, Rocks. Rocks is an especially influential album that influenced this genre of hair metal. It also influenced sort of Metallica took an influence from that. And also Kurt Cobain was influenced by Rocks. I mean, if you take Rocks and you take Red by King Crimson, those are two influences that are directly in grunge, you know. Now, getting into the history of Aerosmith, at some point in 1979, Joe Perry's wife threw a glass of milk over, I think it was the bass player, what's his name, can't remember, Tom, oh, it just flashed into my head, Kennedy? Is that the bass player? Tom Kennedy. So, yeah, we've all been there, haven't we? We know what's happened, right? Nothing to do with the band members. It's the girlfriends and the wives. And she chucked a glass of milk over Tom Kennedy's wife. And there was a big upset. And, of course, in true, Will Smith style, they obviously had to take the sides of their wives, or forever be in the doghouse. And this created a split. Joe Perry leaves, Joe Perry leaves, and the band just slowly goes downhill. We have a period in the early 80s, and I remember this when I first got into Aerosmith. There was this incredible band for the 70s, but they were doing gigs, and Kerrang was talking about, Steven Tyler passing out on stage. They got all this drugs going on. There's a big effort to try and get them back on track by the label, and finally they get Joe Perry back in. They get all the band together, and they make an album, which I can't remember the name of. It's the album before this. Something about cameras or lights, camera action, I can't remember. This isn't my main field of knowledge, as you know, but I do love Aerosmith. So, that didn't work, didn't sell. Nobody was interested in that album. They're stuck, so they then stick them with a bunch of songwriters. Now, Permanent Vacation features 2 songwriters, Jim Valance, and most notably Desmond Child, who wrote or co-wrote Dude Looks Like a Lady. He'd also written Poison, Living the La Vida Loca, or whatever it's called, that tune, and Living on a Prayer. He's written a whole ton of hit records. Now, I had an argument with someone about this when I said, well, that album's so good because they got songwriters from outside. And they said, well, they didn't get songwriters in. And there is a bit of an argument there. If you look at a track like Dude Looks Like a Lady, I think that was originally called something like I Looking for a Lady or something like that. But it was actually, the original lyric was Dude Looks Like a Lady, and Steven Tyler didn't think that was commercial enough. But it was inspired, I think, by walking into a bar and seeing, I think it was Vince Neil in the early days of Mötley Crüe, and he thought it was a lady. And of course, Steven Tyler would then turn around to, Brad Whitford or whatever and say, my God, that dude looks like a lady, and that inspired the song. Then they thought, we can't have a track called Dude Looks Like a Lady. And then Desmond Child, who is gay, came in and said, no, you've got to keep it. That was his songwriting contribution to this song. But for me, that's the contribution. If it wasn't Dude Looks Like a Lady. Now, nowadays, in these modern sort of, gender identity world that we live in, nobody mentions this song anymore, do they? Because it's really, it's transphobic to say that dude looks like a lady. You're supposed to say that lady looks like a lady. It is a lady, not a dude. As I stray into this area, I don't want YouTube to get me in trouble, especially looking like this. I mean, I shouldn't, when we get into sort of a, gender dysphoria, should I really be talking, I'm moving on. Andy, move on. Just, you don't have to say any more. You move on. Right, to number 6. Oh, I've got a fantastic album here. I love this album. Lean on It by Mr. Big came out April 1991. Perhaps the last hurrah of hair metal. Incredible album. It's a super group. It's basically Billy Sheehan, who'd originally been in Talus and then joined Dave Lee Roth's band and made the incredible Eat 'em and Smile, which is behind me, and of course he's going to appear on this list in a bit. And then they put this super group together with Eric Martin on vocals, the late Pat Torpey on drums, and Paul Gilbert on guitar, who was originally the guitarist with Racer X, the incredible neoclassical guitar instrumental virtuoso band. We were nuts. I was nuts about Racer X, back then when I was a kid. I was nuts. So when I saw he was putting a band together with Billy Sheehan, I thought, this is great. And then this album came out. I didn't get the first album. This is the second album, I think. And this came out and it had the hit record To Be With You, right, which is like a nice acoustic ballad. When I heard that, I didn't want to buy it. I didn't get it. Right? A few years later, I got it, and I regretted it because it's a fantastic album. The virtuosity is off the scale. And the thing again is they've got songwriters in. The aforementioned Jim Valance and Andre Pressin as well. Andre Pressin, there's 2 songwriters on this album. On the track, the opening track, Daddy Brother, Love a Little Boy. I had to write that down because I can remember it. Billy Sheehan and Paul Gilbert play their bass and guitar with drills, right? With a drill. This is what hair metal gives you. You know, the Fall, they ain't ever going to play guitar with a drill, are they? All the cool bands, they're never going to do it. They couldn't handle a drill. You know, Billy Sheehan and Paul Gilbert, you know, they can handle a power tool. And I respect a man who can handle a power tool. I really do. Shall we move on? At number 5, I have the second album by Extreme 2 Porno Graffiti, which came out in August 1990. I actually think it influenced that Little Big, that Mr. Big album. I'm getting confused now. Martin Popoff, the great Martin Popoff, who's written a million books on heavy metal and heavy rock, and he's a quality guest on Sea of Tranquility, one of my favourite YouTube. He described this album, Porno Graffiti. It's Porno Graffiti, isn't it? He described this as thinking man's hair metal. Or as we should say, thinking person's hair metal. The first album that they came out with, which I think was just called Extreme, was a lackluster affair, standard sort of hair metal. The main standout of that was the incredible guitar playing from Nuno Bettencourt. I've done a video on Nuno Bettencourt, which is basically a big love letter to Nuno, which I was hoping would send out to the world and Nuno would see it and go, I like this guy, and he sent all this love to me because I would like to have Nuno Bettencourt on my channel because I love him and I think he's an incredible guitar player. They come out with this second album. Now this album is so eclectic. It's got like soul, funk, there's an acoustic guitar cover, More Than Words, which is a classic song. Very eclectic, there's virtuosity off the scale, very funky, very tight. So often, if you go and dig into an album by Warrant or Skid Row or Poison, they're all a bit cheesy, but I find nothing cheesy. Of course, with these two albums here, the Mr. Big album and Pornography by Extreme, this is the last hurrah. This is a great album. Everybody was listening to that album in August 1990, and then the following year, Nirvana come out, and they were so uncool, and it's a shame, you know. Anyway, at number 4, I have this beauty, Eat 'Em and Smile from Dave Lee Roth. Now, Dave Lee Roth left Van Halen in 1984 after their classic album, 1984. There was creative differences. Eddie Van Halen wanted to go down a much more musical route, you know, exploring all these insane, you know, innovative, you know, groundbreaking guitar playing. Whereas David Lee Roth was a showman. He wanted to go down a route which was much more about entertaining, lots of cover versions, lots of vaudeville, you know, sort of musical numbers and all that type of stuff. And he goes and he gets that out of his system with Crazy from the Heat, which was an EP which featured California Girls and Just a Gigolo, classic EP. Then he had the idea of making a film. So he puts together a band to make a film, which was going to be called Crazy from the Heat. The band he puts together features the aforementioned Billy Sheehan on bass, the aforementioned Steve Vai, who had just come out of the band Alcatraz, and Greg Bissonette, who was a big band drummer. You know, Greg's an incredible big band drummer, jazz drummer. Virtuosity off the scale, and they're there writing songs. And I think the reason why this album is so brilliant is because Dave Lee Roth is not pandering to like a record company to make an album that's going to sell loads. He's having fun writing albums to tell a story. He filmed some videos to go with, you know, a number of the tracks on here, Yankee Rose and Going Crazy. And this album, and this is what I love about hair metal, when it's really great, it's so eclectic. There's sort of Rycuda picking on this point, there's sort of thrash metal double bass drum things. You know, you've got Steve Vai talking on guitar, there's a That's Life by Frank Sinatra, big band, and, you know, Steve Vai, some Wes Montgomery, hollow body guitar playing. This album changed my life, right? I've got to say, Eat 'Em and Smile changed my life. I went to art college in 1986. I arrived there as a jazz snob, listening to Keith Jarrett and Pat Metheny and all that type of stuff, you know. And I met my mate Matthew Bourne, who is now quite a well-known painter, and he painted the cover to the Rain album Singularity. very good friend of mine. And I was painting next to him, and I was probably sat there listening to something like, I don't know, Egberto Gismonti, thinking I was very cool, not knowing that 30 years later I would be sat on video dressed like this. But back then I wanted to be cool. And I turned around to my mate and I said, what you listen to? He said, I'm listening to the new David Lee Roth album, Eat and Smile. And I was like, yeah, I used to like Van Halen when I was younger. I say younger, I was like 18 at the time. And he said, have a listen. And he put it across and I put it on. It was Shy Boy. I could not believe it. And it woke me up out of my jazz snobbery stupor. And at that point, I went and bought that album, and then I got back into rock and started to listen to Anthrax and Metallica, and then I started listening to like the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Fishbone. And it bust me out of my own arse snobbery that I was in at the time, which I'm extremely grateful for Mr. Roth for doing this. And the thing about this album that's incredible is that we expected Van Halen to deliver this album at this point in time. But instead, Dave Lee Roth delivered it. The musicians were listening to this. What we got from Van Halen was a move much towards a sort of the hair metal sound that he pioneered on the album 1984. And they went much more towards that sort of commercial thing. And they brought out 5150, you know, Why Can't This Be Love with Sammy Hagar. And, you know, it was a good album. But this was where it was in 1986 for me. This is where it was at. Right, and number 3, I have probably the Sgt. Pepper of hair metal, which is, of course, Appetite for Destruction, which came out in July 1987 by the band Guns N' Roses. This I think it went to number 7 in the mainstream charts, or it could be number 1. I can't read it right. But the point is, this is the 7th best-selling album in the US ever, right? Guns N' Roses were just another trashy Los Angeles band in the sort of mould of Mötley Crüe. You know, they get signed, they go to the studio and they make this album. They expect this album to come out and sell like, you know, a few 100,000 copies, and they can maintain a little career on that scene. What they didn't realise, it's just packed with ridiculous songs, with ridiculous riffs. Axl Rose, love him or hate him, is one of the most extreme singers to have ever graced rock or popular music. He's got one of the biggest ranges in history, and his voice is like, it serrates, you know. Slash, also very iconic guitarist with the hat on, and you know, you can't see his eyes and all the hair, and great guitar player. They're a great band. This is just a brilliant album. Now, the following year, 1988, I saw Guns N' Roses at the Monsters of Rock Festival at Castle Donington, and I managed to squeeze down the front. Unbeknownst to me was the fact that the crowd back then in the 1980s, there was no health and safety. The crowd had surged forward, and we were in a real crush. All of us were in a crush. I was actually with Matthew Bourne, the aforementioned guy that played. I've said aforementioned a lot today, but that's the way it is. So Matthew Bourne, the guy who played me the Eatman Smile back in 1986, he was there with me. 1988, we were at the Monsters of Rock Festival down the front, and it was, I couldn't believe it. And my mate Matt, who was a little bit shorter than me, he got like sucked under by this sort of crushing, and you know, I can remember stepping on people. And when we got back home, I think a couple of people had died in that crush. It was quite a shock. Guns N' Roses have always, for me, been the band, you know, of them being on stage with, you know, not really playing. After all this hype, and you're there going on to these Guns N' Roses, everyone's talking about this, and he was just there saying, look, we're not playing, everybody move back, and what the hell's going on? It was that. So that's what Guns N' Roses mean to me. But for me, this is easily like this sort of mountain peak of hair metal. The 2 albums I've got here now are earlier, and it's just, these are the albums that just innovate this style, and they're monster albums. So at number 2, I have Pyromania by Def Leppard, which is an incredible album. I came up in the new wave of British heavy metal. That's what inspired me to listen to music and start playing. I was listening to bands like Diamond Head, Venom, Iron Maiden, you know, Tigers of Pantang, Raven, you know, it just goes on and on. And one of the bands at that time was Def Leppard, and they'd come out with an EP which had Get Your Rocks Off. I did that on the Friday Rock Show, then On Through the Night came out, and then High and Dry. They were definitely in that world of new wave of British heavy metal, but they had an influence. They rocked a little bit more. They had a little bit more of the AC/DC about them. I've got AC/DC on my t-shirt. Yeah, there we go. There we are. Right, look at that. And I'm actually doing this as well. I've been inspired to do that. Now I'm wearing this wonderful outfit. This is what I would have looked like when I was like about 14 years old, but without the cap, right? And without the sort of greyish hair. I would have had long curly hair at that time, which I used to have when I first started this channel. You can go back and see me with very long hair, and I wish I had it now, because this would really look good if I had that on. Anyway, Def Leppard, really incredible band, and I High and Dry. The thing about Def Leppard, they had great songs, great hooks. In 1982, they hooked up with Mutt Lange, who was AC/DC's producer, and they went through this meticulous production process for this album. They started it in January 1982, and when you think about that, the sound of this album in 1982 is so ahead of the game, and they finished it in November. Think about it. You know, that's 11 months to make this album, and then 1 month to get it all together and get it out in the shops. It came actually out in January 1983. This is the sound of hair metal. Def Leppard. They don't get the credit. They don't get the credit. This is an incredible album. I can remember being into Def Leppard, and then this new single came out, the first single off this album, which was Photograph. And it started up, and they looked all slick, and what's that lead singer called? Rick Allen's the drummer. Joe Elliott, isn't it? How many Elliots have we had? Joe Perry. Anyway, Joe Elliott came out, and he got his hair. His hair was a little bit like this, but a little bit more blonde. It was all sort of cut in. I don't know. I was a bit shocked when I saw it. They got Marilyn Monroe in the video. It was all a bit glossy. Then his song started up, and when it got to the chorus, that hook with those backing vocals, it's not rock. It's pop music, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful composition. The other day, I was chatting to my mate about backing vocals. And I said, then there's this. And I sent him a link saying, this is proper backing vocals. I sent him a link to Photograph by Def Leppard. And he just responded with, well, that's what happens when you have a band that can really sing. And they could really play. Of course, their drummer then had the car crash, and he lost his arm. And that's what everyone thinks of when they think of Def Leppard. But please remember, this is a great album. And I listened to it to death back in 1983 when I got it. It was the future of rock. So what have I got at number 1? I have 1984 by Van Halen. I've just done a video on that album, right? Which came out on January the 9th, 1984. It was actually made in 1983. Okay, we have 2 albums on this list that are named after the year they came out. This one, and of course, Whitesnake's 1987. This album was, for me, the introduction and the successful utilisation of keyboards in a rock band. And that's one of the big features of hair metal. There's a lot of keyboards on there. There's a lot of rocking, a lot of riffing, but there's keyboards there as well. And Eddie Van Halen was the right guy to do it. I've said this over and over again. It's so interesting that the most famous riff by Eddie Van Halen of all time is the riff to Jump, and he's on keyboards. He showed how you could rock with keyboards, right? This album's incredible. I've talked about it so many times here. I'm going to give you a couple of facts that I haven't said before, so you've got a bit of new stuff. When this album came out, it went to number 2 in the charts. You know what kept it off the number 1 spot? Thriller by Michael Jackson, which also featured Eddie Van Halen on guitar on the track Beat It. So in 1983, this band ruled the world, right? And the other thing I'd like to say is the track that blew me away when I first got this album was Hot for Teacher, which opens up side 2. And it sounded like a heavy rock reworking of Quadrant 4 by Billy Cobham. And I'm sure that's where the influence comes on, because Quadrant 4 starts off with this swung double bass drum beat, and then Jan Hammer comes in with this keyboard solo, which is very guitaristic with lots of bends and lots of fluid arpeggios all over the beginning of this drum intro. And it's exactly the same way Hot for Teacher starts off. It actually starts off with the banging. That's not a drum kit. I believe that was Eddie Van Halen's Ferrari, and it was the firing of the big silencer on his exhaust pipe, which then the incredible Alex Van Halen jumps in on over the top, and then we get that thing of the guitar just coming all over the top of it, that incredible guitar intro. That for me is taken directly from Billy Cobham. It then kicks in, it's the most heaviest thing. That was like the precursor to thrash metal, really, you know, at that time. And then it drops down to this almost like Ry Cooder-ish finger-pick guitar part with, you know, Davey Roth mumbling on about how he fancies his school teacher, you know. There's no other style of music which would start off with an exhaust pipe, quote a little bit of Billy Cobham, you know, then come in with a bunch of slice of thrash metal, and then have, you know, someone chatting about how they fancied their teacher. Glam metal, not prog metal, but glam metal, hair metal, the great style. We've got to the end of the video now, I don't have to read anymore. The great genre that's been much maligned. It's been much maligned, it has. So, that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like the dressing up, please let me know. I actually fashioned this outfit together about quarter of an hour before I made this. I thought, oh, I've got a wig. And I put the wig on, and I thought, well, that's not very heavy metal wig, but if I put the cap on here, if I put the cap, which is a Tyson Fury cap, the great Tyson Fury there. And I found these sunglasses in my daughter's bedroom. This belonged to my wife's brother, who sadly died last year. So I'm wearing this in honour of him. He loved his rock. A lot more heavier stuff. This is covered in patches of Mastodon and Black Sabbath and who's that? I don't know. Proper rock. Not this pansy rock that came out in the 1980s that I've just talked about. But don't see it like that! Let's see how this video does. You know, my audience is a very erudite, educated musical audience. They're into jazz and jazz fusion and extreme avant-garde music. This is like going to be like the antichrist of videos here with this hair metal video. So let's see how we go. But I bet you, I've taken a little bit of a punt that my audience deep down listen to all this stuff the same way as I did. And what I want to do on this video is say, it's all right to say you like it. It's all right to say you like these. You go and put it on there. Go and get your Tesla album out. That was a great album. Nearly made the list. Go and get your Tesla album, or go and get your Warrant album, you know, or your Dokken album, or even your Winger album with the incredible Rod Morgenstein from the Dixie Dregs on drums. Go and get it and put it on and bask in the wonderful musicianship of these incredible bands. Were they tasteless? Yes, they were. Is there anything wrong with being tasteless? No, there isn't. It's the best thing there is. It's proper rock and roll. And those snotty, clever people who think that they're cool because they listen to Cabaret Voltaire in the 1980s and wouldn't go near an album by Warrant, you know what we could say to them? You know what we're going to say to them. We're going to say, done, finished. Stick a like on it. Come on. Stick a like. Look what I've done for you. Look what I've done. Look what I've done. If I take that bit off, now what do I look like? You see? That's the illusion. That's the magic I'm conjuring for you. Put a like on it. Put a bloody like on my video. Don't just sit there. It doesn't hurt, does it? Subscribe. Stick a subscription on. Oh. God, I can't, you know, fair weather viewers, they come on this channel, right, watching everything I'm doing, they don't even stick a like on it. I'm not asking, it's not going to hurt you. If you like it, it'll help me, but it's not going to hurt you, is it? It's not going to hurt you. Stick a like on it, subscribe. Even if you don't want to watch me again, even if you just come here, you know, but you got to the end of the video now, so you must have liked it. So subscribe, you can always unsubscribe later. Subscribe, go on. You can support me over on Patreon. I'm very excited about this weekend. I'm off to Fusion Fest. There's a whole bunch of incredible progressive rock bands, and I'm going for my patrons to be doing a couple of live meetings. So they're going to jump into Zoom and we're going to get in there and I'm going to try and get around, see a bit of the bands, have a chat to all the people there, get backstage, meet some of the prog stars that are on the venue. And my students, not my students, but they are my students really. They're students in the world of great progressive rock music. My patrons will be asking questions. Oh, it could all go wrong, but I'm looking forward to that the weekend. And if you want to get involved, it's not just a few extra videos there. You know, we get together. It's a community. I'm meeting up with one of my patrons who's coming to the festival on Friday. Steve, I'll be seeing him. I look cool in this, don't I? You see, it always works. Even with a grey-haired 50-year-old guy, it always works. So if you want to become a patron, you can jump over there and become a patron. If not, you can stick a bit of cash into my PayPal YouTube tip jar. We're done. I'm going to put the wig back on. I'm going to try and extract that last bit of comedy out of this. Get the sunglasses back on as well. Oh, bloody hell. Thanks for watching this video. Oh my God, I could just about see myself. Does any of the British people remember that? Does anyone remember that kids' TV show in the 70s? Do you remember it? Michael Bentine's Potty Time. I'm saying no more.